There's a place on this planet where a single afternoon can contain more life and death than most people will witness in a lifetime. Where the water you're standing next to is simultaneously the source of all life in every direction, and one of the most efficient killing systems ever assembled by nature. Where a fish the size of a school bus moves through murky brown water beneath your canoe and you will never see it. Where something watches you from a bank that looks empty. Where the air itself is a participant, hot and wet and pressing against you like a living thing, loaded with spores and pollen and the wing dust of 10,000 insects you cannot name. Where every single organism, from the microbes in the soil to the canopy trees that took 300 years to reach their current height, is engaged in a negotiation with every other organism about who gets to keep living and for how long. I'm talking about the Amazon, not the Amazon of the nature documentary, not the carefully edited version where the narrator's voice is calm, and the camera finds the beautiful moments and the difficult moments are compressed into digestible sequences. I am talking about the actual Amazon, the one that operates on its own terms and on its own schedule, and has absolutely no awareness of or interest in human timelines or human comfort or human survival. Subscribe right now if you want to understand the world at the level where it actually operates, not the surface version, not the postcard version, but the real thing, the deep thing, the version that makes you rethink what you thought you knew about life itself. Let's go. The Amazon basin covers approximately 5.5 million square kilometers. That number is large enough that it essentially has no meaning until you try to move through the actual landscape, at which point the scale becomes visceral rather than numerical. Flying over it is one of the most disorienting experiences available to a human being because the forest does not stop. You look out the window and there is forest. You look an hour later and there is forest. The occasional brown river cuts through it, wide and sinuous and reflecting the sky, but on either side of the river the forest closes back in and the forest is all there is in every direction to every horizon, an unbroken carpet of green that your eye cannot find the edge of because there is no edge to find from that altitude. The Amazon is not a forest in the way that a forest in Europe or North America is a forest. It is a biome. It is a continent-scale ecological system that operates as something approaching a single organism, cycling water and carbon and nitrogen and energy through itself in loops that have been running for tens of millions of years. And within it, life happens at a pace and at a density that is genuinely incomprehensible until you are standing inside it. Let me start with something small. Let me start with a leaf. A leaf falls from a tree in the Amazon and hits the forest floor. In a temperate forest, that leaf might lie there for a year or two before it fully decomposes. In the Amazon, under the right conditions, it can be processed and broken down within weeks. What happens to that leaf is a cascade of events involving bacteria and fungi and beetles and ants and termites and nematodes and organisms without common names. A succession of decomposers each taking their portion, each extracting what they need, each passing the residue on to the next stage in the chain, until what was a leaf becomes part of the soil and then becomes part of a root, and then becomes part of another leaf, and the cycle closes and begins again. The nutrient cycling of the Amazon is extraordinarily efficient and extraordinarily fast, which is both the reason the forest is so extraordinarily productive and the reason it is more fragile than it looks. The productivity is not stored in the soil the way it is in temperate forests. It is stored in the living biomass, in the trees and the roots and the fungi and the organisms. Remove the living material and you remove the fertility. The soil underneath, stripped of its biological machinery, is often poor and acidic and unsuited to agriculture. The forest is its own foundation in a way that is unlike almost any other ecosystem on Earth, and the leaf on the forest floor is a small but complete illustration of how that works. But we are not here to talk about leaves in the abstract. We are here to talk about what it is actually like inside this place, what it feels like to move through it, what the light is like, what the sound is like, and what it means concretely and specifically when I say that life and death are decided in an instant. The light in the interior of the Amazon is not like outdoor light anywhere else. At midday, when the sun is directly overhead and the sky outside the canopy is brilliant and harsh, the forest floor receives about 2% of the light that falls on the top of the canopy. 2%. The canopy is not a leaky roof. It is a remarkably efficient light collection system, and every square centimeter of leaf up there is working hard to capture as much of that energy as possible before it can penetrate further. The result is a kind of permanent filtered twilight at ground level, green-tinted soft-edged, full of moving shadows as the upper canopy shifts in the high winds that never fully reach the forest floor. It is dim in a way that takes your eyes minutes to adjust to when you step in from a cleared area. And within that dimness, things are happening. The animal layer that operates in this understory light is distinct from the animal layer of the canopy above. Different species of birds occupy each layer. The canopy birds, the toucans and parrots and macaws that people associate with Amazon imagery, rarely come down. They are up there in the light and the warmth and the wind, moving between the flowering and fruiting trees in ways that are mostly invisible from below. Down here in the understory and on the forest floor, different birds have evolved for life in low light and dense vegetation. Antbirds following ant swarms to catch the insects flushed into panic by the ants. Mannequins in their display clearings performing the most elaborate courtship dances in the bird world, snapping their wings to produce sounds like electrical cracks and popping, spinning on their display branches in front of females who observe with the calm assessment of someone who has seen all the candidates. Tinamous moving through the leaf litter like small, perfectly camouflaged shadows, nearly silent, nearly invisible, making sounds at dawn that carry extraordinary distances through the forest, and that sound less like bird calls than like someone playing a very sorrowful flute. And on the forest floor itself, the level that receives the least light and is therefore the most overlooked in popular imagery of the Amazon, life is impossibly dense. The leaf litter is a community. It is not just dead leaves. It is a three-dimensional matrix of fungal threads and bacteria and the organisms that feed on them and the organisms that feed on those organisms, and so on through every trophic level that you can fit into a layer 2 or 3 centimeters deep. Walking through the Amazon, your feet are passing through a civilization with every step. A civilization that does not notice you, that does not recognize you as anything in particular, that was here before your species existed and will be here long after. This is not a metaphor. This is simply true. Now let me tell you about the river. Because the river is where the drama is most concentrated and most visible and most legible, and because the river is how the Amazon works as a system in a way that is not obvious until you understand the scale of it. The Amazon River itself is, by volume of water discharged, the largest river on Earth. It discharges more freshwater into the ocean than the next 7 largest rivers on Earth combined. This is a fact that sounds like the kind of statistic that gets thrown around to generate a sense of scale and then forgotten. But if you actually sit with it for a moment, it tells you something fundamental about the hydrological reality of the basin. The Amazon basin receives approximately 2 meters of rainfall per year on average, more in many areas, and that water comes from 2 sources. Some of it comes from the Atlantic Ocean carried inland by the trade winds, but a significant portion of it, estimates suggest around half, is generated by the forest itself. The trees of the Amazon transpire extraordinary quantities of water. They pull water from the soil through their roots and release it as water vapor through their leaves in a process called transpiration. And this water vapor rises into the atmosphere and becomes clouds, and those clouds travel west and southwest, pushed by the circulation patterns of the basin. And they release that water as rain further inland. The Amazon makes its own weather. It is not simply a landscape that receives rainfall. It is a system that participates actively in the generation and distribution of rainfall, not just over itself but over much of South America. The rivers and the forests of southern Brazil, the agricultural heartland of the continent, are watered in part by atmospheric rivers generated by trees in the Amazon that are thousands of kilometers away. The forest breathes and its breath is rain. And within this hydrological system, the river and its hundreds of tributaries and the lakes and flooded forests and wetlands that connect to them, life has evolved into forms that would seem impossible if you did not know they were real. Let me tell you about the Arapaima. The Arapaima, called pirarucu in Brazilian Portuguese, is one of the largest freshwater fish in the world, regularly reaching 2 meters and sometimes reaching 3 meters and a weight of 200 kilograms or more. This is not a small fish. This is not a fish you would see in a tank. This is an animal the size of a large human being, torpedo-shaped, armored in scales that are among the most mechanically impressive natural materials ever studied. Scales with a hard mineral outer layer, and a tough, flexible inner layer that can absorb blows that would shatter glass without breaking. The Arapaima's scales are currently being studied by engineers and materials scientists who want to understand how to replicate their properties in protective materials for human use. The fish figured out the engineering problem roughly 200 million years ago. The Arapaima is also an air-breathing fish. It has a modified swim bladder that functions as a primitive lung, and it must come to the surface every 10 to 20 minutes to breathe air. In the oxygen-poor waters of the flooded Amazon forest, where dead vegetation is perpetually decomposing and consuming dissolved oxygen, this is not a disadvantage. It is a superpower. The Arapaima can thrive in waters where other large fish suffocate. But it also means that the fish must surface regularly, and when it surfaces, it is briefly visible, a massive dark shape breaking the water for a moment before it goes back down. Indigenous fishers who have hunted the Arapaima for thousands of years have developed an intimate understanding of this behavior, of the timing, the patterns, the water conditions that tell you where a large fish is likely to surface and roughly when. And from this knowledge a fishing tradition emerged that involves approaching a surfacing arapaima in a canoe and striking it with a harpoon at the moment it breaks the surface. The margin for error is essentially zero. The fish is at the surface for seconds. The strike has to be accurate and hard enough to penetrate those armor scales. And you are doing this from a small boat on a river that also contains caimans, electric eels, and stingrays buried in the mud of the riverbed. This is what I mean when I talk about life and death decided in an instant, not as a figure of speech, as a physical reality. The electric eel, which is not actually an eel but a knifefish, a distant relative of catfish, produces electrical discharges of up to 800 volts. To put that in context, a standard household electrical outlet in North America runs on 120 volts. The electric eel can produce 6.5 times that. It does this through specialized electrocyte cells that line most of its body, cells that operate like biological batteries, each one producing a small voltage and all of them arranged in series so that the voltages add up. The discharge can stun large prey, can deter predators including caimans and humans, and in the case of large individuals can cause cardiac arrest in a person who enters the water near one. The electric eel has also recently been discovered to use a behavior that has stunned scientists. When it encounters prey in shallow water or near the surface, it can leap partially out of the water and press the electric organs in its body against an animal standing at the water's edge, essentially turning itself into a living taser that attacks upward. This behavior was theorized by a 19th-century naturalist named Alexander von Humboldt, who described watching horses being attacked by electric eels leaping from the water, and was then considered embellished or inaccurate for nearly 2 centuries before modern researchers documented it on camera and confirmed that Humboldt had been right all along. The river is full of things that will kill you and the forest is full of things that will kill you and none of them are doing it out of malice. This is perhaps the most important thing to understand about the Amazon as a place. It is not hostile to humans in the way that we often use that word. It is not oriented toward humans at all. It has no orientation toward humans. The Amazon predated humans by tens of millions of years, and its predators and venomous animals and disease vectors evolved in response to pressures that had nothing to do with us. We moved into an ecosystem that was already extraordinarily well-armed and extraordinarily competitive, and we encountered all of those arms and all of that competition, and some of us concluded that the forest was a place of danger, which is true, and some of us figured out how to live inside it, which is also true, and both responses are rational given what the forest actually is. The people who figured out how to live inside it did something extraordinary. Let me tell you about them. There are estimated to be between 300 and 400 distinct indigenous groups in the Amazon basin. Estimates vary depending on definitions and current contact status. Of these, somewhere around 100 groups are in what is called voluntary isolation, meaning they have chosen, actively and repeatedly over generations, to have no contact with the outside world. They know the outside world exists. They have almost certainly observed outsiders at a distance, observed aircraft overhead, observed the edges of deforestation where their territory meets the cleared land. They have made a choice, a collective, multi-generational choice to remain apart. This is not ignorance, it is a decision. And given what has historically happened to Amazonian peoples at the moment of first contact with the outside world, a history that includes epidemic disease, enslavement, forced relocation, cultural destruction, and genocide on a scale that is difficult to fully document because the documentation largely relied on the perpetrators to do the recording. The decision to remain isolated begins to look less like a puzzling choice made by people unaware of their options, and more like one of the most rational strategic decisions in the history of human survival. The peoples of the Amazon who have maintained contact with the broader world, and who have been in some cases maintaining that contact for centuries of brutal disruption, carry within their knowledge systems an understanding of the Amazon that is, in certain domains, far more complete and far more practically sophisticated than anything academic ecology has yet achieved. This is not a romantic or patronizing claim. It is documented fact. The pharmaceutical industry has developed multiple important drugs from plants that indigenous Amazonian healers brought to the attention of researchers. The number of plants with known medicinal properties that have been identified through indigenous knowledge vastly exceeds the number that would have been found through random academic survey. The specific knowledge of animal behavior that allows an Amazonian hunter to find, approach, and catch animals that a trained wildlife biologist might spend weeks searching for without success is not intuition or luck. It is knowledge. Accumulated, tested, transmitted knowledge, specific to this place, specific to these species, built over hundreds of generations of observation. The Yanomami, one of the largest indigenous groups in the Amazon with communities in both Brazil and Venezuela, have a cosmology in which the forest is not a resource or a backdrop but a living relational world, in which every element of the environment is understood to have agency and intentionality, and a relationship with every other element that must be navigated respectfully if you want to survive. This is sometimes described in Western contexts as spiritual or animist in a way that subtly marks it as pre-rational, as a charming belief system rather than a sophisticated model of ecological reality. But the practical outcomes of operating according to this model, the specific decisions it generates about where to hunt and where not to hunt, when to take and when to leave. How to manage a forest landscape so that it continues to produce over centuries rather than collapsing under overextraction, these outcomes are not charming. They are extraordinarily sophisticated resource management decisions that have sustained human communities in one of the most complex ecosystems on Earth for thousands of years. The cosmology is doing real ecological work. Let me take you to a specific place within the Amazon, not a famous place and not a place you will find on most tourist itineraries. Let me take you to the Várzea. The Várzea is the seasonally flooded forest of the Amazon. It is the forest that lines the whitewater rivers, the rivers that carry sediment from the Andes and are therefore muddy and mineral-rich, and it is the forest that disappears underwater for months at a time every year. During the flood season, the water can rise 10 to 15 meters. Trees that were standing on dry ground in August are standing under 12 meters of water in March. And the entire community of organisms in the Várzea has evolved around this annual cycle of flooding and draining in ways that produce some of the most astonishing biological adaptations anywhere in the world. The fish of the Várzea, of which there are over 3,000 species in the Amazon basin as a whole, more freshwater fish species than on any other river system on Earth, many of them move up into the flooded forest during high water to feed on the fruits and seeds that fall from the trees into the water around them. This is not a marginal behavior. It is a central feeding strategy for many species. The tambaqui, one of the most important food fish in the Amazon, has molars, actual crushing molars, evolved specifically for cracking the seeds of the trees that grow along the riverbanks, seeds that fall into the water and would otherwise be inaccessible to fish that cannot reach the branches. The relationship between the tambaqui and certain Amazonian trees is so specific and so long established that the trees have become dependent on the fish for seed dispersal. The fish eats the fruit, swims to another part of the flooded forest and either passes or spits out the seeds, which then germinate in the sediment when the water recedes. Remove the tambaqui and you change the composition of the Várzea forest. The fish is not just an animal living in the forest. The fish is part of the forest's reproductive system. The trees themselves have adapted to the flooding in extraordinary ways. Some species can survive complete inundation for months, continuing to grow, continuing to photosynthesize as long as their upper canopy is above water, managing the physiological stress of oxygen deprivation in their root zones through various biochemical strategies that are still being studied. The rubber tree, Hevea brasiliensis, the tree whose latex became the foundation of a global industry and triggered one of the most violent colonial episodes in Amazonian history, grows naturally in the Várzea and its surrounding forests. It has a specific relationship with the flooding cycle and with the organisms that disperse its seeds. The history of rubber in the Amazon is a history of ecological misunderstanding as much as economic exploitation. Attempts to grow rubber trees in plantation monocultures in the Amazon itself, without the natural spacing and the natural diversity of the original forest, failed catastrophically because the leaf blight diseases that in the natural forest are kept in check by the distance between individual trees, and by the web of antagonistic organisms that limit the growth of any single pathogen, were able to spread rapidly through the dense rows of plantation trees. The natural forest spacing that seems inefficient to a plantation mindset turns out to be a disease management system. The distance between trees is not wasted space, it is immunity. Now let me tell you about the caiman, because we have been in the water long enough and we should probably pay attention to what else is in the water with us. There are 6 species of caiman in South America, and all of them live in or near the waters of the Amazon basin in some part of their range. The black caiman, Melanosuchus niger, is the largest, reaching up to 5 or 6 meters in exceptional individuals, though 3 to 4 meters is more typical for a large adult. The black caiman was hunted to near extinction through the mid-20th century for its skin, which was considered high quality for leather goods, and populations crashed to a fraction of their historical numbers before hunting regulations and eventually protections began to allow recovery. In areas where populations have recovered, the black caiman has returned to its role as an apex predator in the aquatic ecosystem, and its effect on those ecosystems is profound in the same way that any apex predator's removal and return is profound. The caiman controls the size and behavior of fish populations. It modifies the vegetation along riverbanks through its nesting behavior. It creates depressions in the landscape during dry season that hold water and become refugia for fish and other aquatic organisms through the dry months. It scavenges and it hunts, and it sits perfectly still in the water for hours at a time in a way that makes it essentially invisible to everything that is not looking for it, and then it strikes. The strike of a large caiman is one of the fastest muscular actions in the vertebrate world. The bite force of a large specimen is among the highest ever measured in a living animal. When a caiman takes something at the water's edge, the sequence of events happens so fast that human perception, which is not fast enough to process events at this speed in real time, registers it as almost simultaneous. Water, movement, gone. The capybara that was drinking at the bank is underwater before the sound of the splash has reached your ears if you're standing 20 meters away. The tapir that bent down to drink is gone before the ripples have fully propagated. This is not cruelty. It is physics. It is the physics of an animal that has been perfecting its ambush strategy for 200 million years. Crocodilians are older than dinosaurs. They survived the end Cretaceous extinction event that killed everything else in the large vertebrate category. They have had a long time to get good at what they do. And what they do in the context of the Amazon ecosystem is regulate. They keep populations in check. They remove the sick and the slow and the old and the unlucky. They recycle nutrients from terrestrial animals that drown in their jaws back into the aquatic system. They are part of the machine, an important part, and the machine runs differently without them, as the decades of their hunting-driven absence demonstrated clearly. There is a sound the Amazon makes at night that I want to try to describe to you, because the nighttime soundscape is one of the most overwhelming sensory experiences the forest offers, and it is one of the things that most separates the experience of actually being there from any recorded version of it. At dusk in the Amazon, as the light fails, there is a transition period that lasts perhaps half an hour in which the day shift is finishing and the night shift is starting, and for a brief period both are operating simultaneously, producing a layered acoustic experience of staggering complexity. The night closes down and the forest shifts into its nocturnal mode, and the sound of the night Amazon is not the sound of the day Amazon turned down. It is a completely different soundscape, different species, different volumes, different rhythms, and above everything else the insects. The insect chorus of a tropical night in the Amazon is not background noise, it is the foreground. It is so loud and so constant and so all-encompassing that the first time you hear it, if you have spent your life in temperate zones, you find yourself almost physiologically disoriented, because your nervous system does not have a category for sound this omnipresent. There is no silence in the gaps between sounds the way there is in other natural soundscapes. The gaps themselves are filled. The cicadas and the katydids and the frogs and the other insects combine into something that functions more like a wall of sound than like individual voices. And within that wall there are individual voices if you train your ear, the specific call of a specific frog species at a specific frequency, the sawing rhythm of a katydid in the tree directly above you, the bell-like tone of the Tungara frog's call drifting up from the water. But you have to work to hear them individually because the collective drowns everything. The frogs of the Amazon deserve a chapter of their own. They will get several paragraphs here, which is insufficient but better than nothing. There are roughly 1,000 species of frog in the Amazon basin. 1,000, this is approximately 1/6 of all the frog species on Earth, compressed into a single biome. They occupy every layer from the canopy, where tree frogs live their entire lives on the bromeliad plants that collect water in their leaf bases, to the leaf litter floor, where small camouflage species are nearly impossible to distinguish from dead leaves until they move. They have evolved an extraordinary diversity of reproductive strategies. Some species lay their eggs in foam nests that the parents whip up from secretions and that keep the embryos moist in the absence of standing water. Some species carry their eggs on their backs or inside specialized pouches. Some species are direct developers, meaning the tadpole stage happens entirely within the egg and a fully formed frog emerges directly, skipping the aquatic larval stage entirely. Some species are poisonous and advertise this fact with colors so bright they almost seem to emit their own light. The poison dart frogs, whose skin contains alkaloid toxins derived from the insects they eat, and concentrated to levels that can be lethal to larger animals. The indigenous peoples of the Amazon have used these toxins, carefully prepared, on the tips of blowgun darts for hunting for thousands of years. The name poison dart frog is not a metaphor. The glass frogs are among the strangest things in the Amazon. These are small frogs, typically found in the understory and canopy, whose abdominal skin is partially translucent, allowing you to see the internal organs and in some species the beating heart directly through the skin. Why this should be advantageous from a camouflage perspective has been studied, and the answer involves the way transparency disrupts the visual outline of the animal when it is sitting against a leaf. The edges of a transparent animal are optically diffuse in a way that makes the boundary between the frog and the background harder for a predator's visual system to resolve. Transparency is camouflage. The organ you can see beating in the frog's chest is hidden by being visible. This is the Amazon doing what the Amazon does, finding solutions to problems that seem to have no solution by operating outside the assumptions that constrain more straightforward approaches. I want to talk about jaguars, because we have been in this forest long enough that it would be strange not to. The jaguar is the largest cat in the Americas and the third largest in the world after the tiger and the lion, and in the Amazon it occupies the role of apex terrestrial predator in a way that shapes the behavior of every medium and large animal in the ecosystem. The jaguar does not run its prey down. It does not cooperate with other individuals to coordinate an attack. It stalks, it waits. It moves through the forest at a pace that seems inconsistent with predation until the moment it is not, and then the speed and power of its commitment to the kill is absolutely total. The jaguar kills with a bite uniquely among the big cats, not to the throat but to the skull. It bites through the skull of its prey directly, piercing the brain case with canine teeth that exert a bite force of up to 1,500 pounds per square inch, the most powerful bite of any cat and one of the most powerful of any mammal on Earth. A direct bite through the skull is instant. It is one of the cleanest deaths available in the Amazon, which is saying something. The jaguar is also a swimmer and a diver, unique among the big cats in its comfort with and ability in water. It hunts caimans, an apex predator of the terrestrial environment that also hunts the apex predator of the aquatic environment. There are videos of this that have been filmed by wildlife cameras in the Pantanal, the adjacent wetland to the south of the Amazon, and watching a jaguar take a large caiman is one of those experiences that recalibrates your sense of what physical power means in the natural world. The caiman is a heavily armored animal with a skull designed by 200 million years of evolution to withstand enormous forces. The jaguar takes it at the back of the skull, finds the gap between the armored plates and drives its canines through. The caiman's tail thrashes once, then it stops. The jaguar leaves no room for the outcome to be anything other than what the jaguar has decided it will be. This is not anthropomorphization. This is a description of a predatory strategy that is as close to certain as biology allows. The jaguar is not the only apex predator in its forest, but it is the most total in the sense that it kills so reliably, and so absolutely that the margin for survival for its prey depends almost entirely on not being there when the jaguar arrives. For many animals in the Amazon, survival is not about defeating predation. It is about not being the animal that gets selected. The herd of peccaries, wild pig-like animals that move through the forest in groups ranging from a handful to several hundred, collectively represent too much mass and too much aggression for a jaguar to attack efficiently. The individual peccary at the edge of the group, the one that fell slightly behind, the one that is slightly older or slightly sick, is the one that gets taken. The peccary group itself is a survival technology. Membership in the group reduces your individual probability of being the selected animal. Being in the group is the strategy. The harpy eagle, the largest eagle in the Americas and one of the most powerful raptors on Earth, takes a different approach. The harpy hunts from above, from the canopy, targeting animals in the middle layers of the forest. Its primary prey is sloths and monkeys. It has the wingspan to maneuver through the forest interior, shorter and broader than eagles that hunt in open country, allowing it to bank and turn between trunks and branches in the canopy where its prey lives. Its talons are the size of a grizzly bear's claws. When it closes those talons on a sloth or a spider monkey, the compression force is sufficient to crush bone and pierce vital organs simultaneously. The bird does not need the prey to die before it carries it. It can carry a howler monkey, an animal that can weigh up to 10 kilograms, in flight. Watch a harpy eagle land on a branch at full perching speed with a monkey in its talons, and you understand immediately that this bird is not a large bird. It is a different category of thing. It is a flying predator that operates at a scale that your category of bird is not equipped to handle, and the forest reorganizes itself around its presence, with monkeys giving alarm calls that are specifically keyed to aerial predator threats, and stopping all movement and going completely silent when a harpy is nearby, because silence and stillness are the only defenses available to an animal that cannot outrun or outfly what is hunting it. The anaconda lives at the water's edge and in the shallows of the Amazon rivers and flooded forests, and it hunts by ambush and by constriction, and it is the heaviest snake on Earth. A large female green anaconda can reach 6 meters in length and exceed 250 kilograms. It kills by wrapping around its prey and squeezing, not crushing bones, as is commonly believed, but preventing breathing. With each exhalation of the prey animal, the anaconda tightens slightly, so that the next inhalation is smaller and the one after that smaller still, and so on until breathing is no longer possible and the prey loses consciousness and dies of asphyxiation. The anaconda then swallows the prey whole, with the elastic jaw ligaments and the remarkably distensible body allowing it to consume animals that are considerably wider than the snake's resting diameter. A large anaconda can swallow a deer or a capybara or, in documented cases, a small caiman. The digestion of a large meal can take weeks or months, during which the snake may not move at all, lying in a torpid state in the shallows while the extraordinarily powerful digestive acids dissolve everything including bone. The anaconda does not need to be fast. It is not a pursuit predator. It is a waiting predator. It will stay in the same stretch of riverbank or flooded forest for days or weeks if the conditions are right, feeling the water currents that indicate large animals moving upstream or downstream, waiting for the moment when something comes close enough that speed is no longer the relevant variable. At that moment, the anaconda is extraordinarily fast. The strike that initiates a constriction is a ballistic movement, the head driven forward faster than a human hand can track, the jaws closing on the prey before the prey has processed the sensory information of the snake's presence. Bite, wrap, squeeze. The sequence takes fractions of seconds, and by the time it is complete, the outcome has already been decided. Life and death decided in an instant, not as an abstraction. As a description of the physical mechanics of what happens in this forest at every moment. Let me talk about something different now. Let me talk about the trees. Not the trees as background, not the trees as the place where things happen, but the trees themselves as organisms, as individuals with histories and strategies and relationships that are as complex and in some ways as dramatic as the animals. The Brazil nut tree, Bertholletia excelsa, reaches heights of over 50 meters and lives for hundreds, possibly over 1,000 years. It is one of the tallest trees in the Amazon canopy and one of the most long-lived, and its seed dispersal story is one of the most intricate in the plant world. The Brazil nut produces large, hard-shelled pods, like a coconut-sized wooden sphere, each containing 12 to 25 seeds arranged like the segments of an orange. These pods fall from height onto the forest floor with enough force to be dangerous to anything directly below. The pods are too hard for most animals to open. Only one animal in the Amazon has teeth strong enough to regularly open them. The agouti, a medium-sized rodent roughly the size of a rabbit. The agouti gnaws through the pod, removes some seeds to eat immediately, and buries others in scattered cache sites across the forest floor. These buried seeds, the ones the agouti forgets or never returns to, are the Brazil nut tree's method of reproduction. The tree cannot reproduce without the agouti. The agouti needs the tree for the energy-dense seeds. It is a mutualism, a relationship of mutual dependence, that has been operating for millions of years, and that means the presence of Brazil nut trees in a given forest is a reliable indicator of healthy agouti populations and vice versa. Destroy the agouti population through hunting and you begin the slow extinction of the Brazil nut tree in that area. Cut down the Brazil nut trees and the agouti declines. Each organism is in a real sense the other organism's condition of existence. But the Brazil nut tree is also dependent on another organism for a different part of its life cycle. Its flowers have a complex structure that can only be pollinated by a specific type of bee, the orchid bee, which is the only insect with a mouth part long and strong enough to open the flower's coiled hood and reach the nectar within. The orchid bee, a large metallic bee of iridescent green and blue that looks like a flying jewel, is in turn dependent on specific orchid species for the compounds that male bees collect and use in their own mating displays. The orchids need the forest. The bees need the orchids. The Brazil nut trees need the bees. The agoutis need the Brazil nut trees. The Brazil nut trees need the agoutis. Pull out any one element and the whole structure shifts toward collapse. The Amazon is not a collection of independent organisms. It is a web of dependencies so dense and so interlocking that the line between individual and community, between organism and ecosystem, is genuinely unclear at certain scales. The indigenous peoples of the Amazon understood this web not through the mechanism of ecological science but through the lived experience of being inside it for thousands of years. The Kayapo people of the Brazilian Amazon do not simply live adjacent to the forest, they manage it. They have been managing it for centuries in ways that were so subtle and so aligned with natural processes that Western scientists initially failed to recognize what they were looking at when they analyzed certain Amazonian forests and found species compositions that seemed too convenient, too well arranged, with too high a proportion of useful plant species to be random. They were not random. they were gardens. Forests shaped over centuries by selective planting and selective harvesting and selective burning and the deliberate introduction of specific plants to specific locations. The dark soil found in patches across the Amazon called terra preta is not a natural formation. It is the residue of indigenous agricultural and land management practice, soil enriched by the deliberate incorporation of charcoal and organic matter and bone over long periods of time, soil so fertile that it continues to regenerate itself after 500 years. The original farmers are gone in most places, killed by disease and conquest. Their soil remains. The Amazon was not a pristine wilderness when Europeans arrived. It was a managed landscape, inhabited and shaped by tens of millions of people organized into complex societies, with cities of tens of thousands of inhabitants connected by road networks and trading networks, with agriculture sophisticated enough to feed those cities in an environment where conventional agriculture is extremely difficult, with land management practices extensive enough to have measurably altered the species composition of large areas of forest. The encounter with European contact, and the diseases that preceded actual European arrival by running ahead of the explorers through existing trade networks, killed perhaps 90% of the indigenous population in the first century of contact. The forest we see today, which feels ancient and untouched, is in part a forest regenerating from that catastrophe.